Hey, Bruce.
Hey,
Let's have a discussion today about who's in charge in the Postgres community. So first, I've heard about the core team and committers, but I don't really understand who is who and what they do. Can you walk me and our audience through how that works and who's in charge?
yeah, of course. We had we had a big Postgres community conference in Vancouver 2 weeks ago, and one of the things we talked about was all of the infrastructure that now surrounds the community. In fact, Tom Lane had a presentation at the developer meeting talking about like the history of the core team, which didn't exist when we originally started. It was basically the people in 1996. It was the people who were needed to make a release. And over time, the need for like a specific team to deal with contentious issues, issues of discipline, issues where confidentiality was required, sort of evolved into the core team. But the core team never envisioned to carry all of the responsibility. And like a good distributed volunteer organization, we've accrued a dozen, 2 dozen of these independent groups around the project that do a variety of tasks, 99% of the time independently, where there's very little, there's input that comes from other people, but there's not the hierarchical structure that you would assume from, a typical organization where you have, assets and you have shareholders and you have profit requirements and revenues coming in. We don't have any of that. So we've sort of abandoned a lot of that structure, and we end up with this sort of amorphous group of committees that all do things independently, and in almost all cases, operate, on their own. The only real oversight is that anyone can criticize anything. So they just have to send an email, and then everyone sees it, and then you as a committee member have to decide, okay, how am I going to respond to this? Is this a valid criticism? Is it something we did wrong? Is it something we're not doing? Is somebody nagging me to do something that I haven't done already? And that sort of amorphous structure is really what you end up with in the Postgres community, even though, just like you wouldn't think open source would work, you wouldn't think that kind of structure would work either. But it actually works very well.
Okay, thanks. So contributing code seems to be the most important thing that people do. How does that work? Who does it? And most important, who controls what is being submitted?
Right. So originally we had just a set of committers who had permission to write into the repository. So what would happen would be somebody would send an email to the email list, and either it would have a patch or it would report a problem or ask for a feature. And then either one of those committers will write the feature or write the patch, or they'll use the patch that came in on the email and then modify it. As things started to get more, the volume started to get a lot higher. So we ended up creating a committers group. So there's a group of 22, I believe it's 22 people, maybe now down to 20, who have the right to commit to the code, but they really don't have unlimited rights to do anything. They have to, they can either get patches or ideas from the email lists, or they can write their own. But of course, they also have to post those patches to the email list and get approval from the community, and anyone again can criticize anything that anyone suggests. And then if nobody criticizes it after a week or two, you have the ability to commit that code. Also, because of the volume, we realized that we needed some kind of framework for new patches to get categorized. So we created something called a commit fest application, which allows you to effectively register your patch and what the feature does or what the change does. And then every 2 months, we will go through there as committers and pick up those patches and apply them.
Yeah, I've heard about these commit fests. I mean, who organizes them? You mentioned they happen every 2 months. Do people get invited? Are they really like getting together, or is it virtual? How does it work?
So it is all virtual. We have we nominate or ask for volunteers to manage the Commit Fest. So there is a Commit Fest manager, and that Commit Fest manager is responsible for making sure all the patches are in good shape, for effectively communicating with the people in case a patch needs to be updated, or if it no longer applies, or maybe it doesn't even make sense anymore, and he'll remove that from the Commit Fest app. So during that 1 month period, the Commit Fest manager will be responsible for managing those patches. He's not necessarily going to be the person applying the patches. He's merely the person who's responsible for making sure the patches are in good shape, that if anything needs to be removed, those are removed. If any author needs perhaps a rebase because the patches no longer applies or the tests don't apply, and he can give them feedback in terms of how to make that more successful. And hopefully we get through all the patches in a Commit Fest. Practically, we probably get through half of them, or maybe 60% of them. And then a good chunk end up being pushed to the next Commit Fest, which is a problem which we're trying to figure out how to address. And we're not quite sure how to. A lot of times it's patches that are either we aren't sure the right approach is being made, or we aren't sure that the feature is something we want. So it just kind of, sometimes they languish there for too long. And the Commit Fest manager eventually is going to look and say, okay, this patch has been here for a certain number of months. None of the committers have picked it up, so we're gonna reject it and then move on to something else. It's a very, very awkward, very awkward system, because it's very hard for somebody to decide unilaterally this patch is no good. We're always optimistic, I think, and we're always hoping that somebody will see the goodness in the patch or see a way to make it work or find an improvement. But ultimately, some committer has to take responsibility for the patch, because once they apply the patch, they're responsible for maintaining at least that patch until we get to a release. Now, yeah, other people can help as well, but they're kind of on the hook because they put their responsibility behind that patch and applied it.
And are commit fests open to all, or are they invite only? I mean, they happen in public, or how does that work?
Well, there's a Commit Fest webpage. So if you do Postgres Commit Fest app, you'll see it. There are, again, a Commit Fest every 2 months. And what we typically do is people will register their patches in the Commit Fest. So I think you need to create a Postgres login, a community login to do it. And once you do that, it's easy, just an email. Once you do that, then you can effectively register your patch in the Commit Fest. And that guarantees that at least the Commit Fest manager will look at it, and hopefully a committer will also look at it.
But the whole process, just like almost everything in the community, is public and completely out in the open, right?
Completely out in the open. There's the idea that the only times we ever modify the source code in a way that's not visible would be security patches. So we have a separate security list that's private, and we will get reports perhaps from individuals stating there's a security problem in a certain area. And within hopefully a reasonable amount of time, we will write a patch for that, and we will apply the patch slightly before the release goes out. And then once the release goes out, we will post the commit message, and then everyone will see it. So technically, those security patches are developed privately within the security list. But once they're released, then the patch becomes public and anyone can see it.
But everything else around, submitting a patch, a committer reviewing it, providing feedback, deciding to accept it or not, all of that stuff is public and on the mailing list, right?
Right. You wouldn't want any other way, because we've seen a couple cases where that has happened, where, for example, a company will work on a patch sort of internally before it gets to the community, and that usually works out badly because you want ideally you want to go through the process that we recommend for patches. So the first thing, we don't want to, ideally you wouldn't show up with a patch. There's certain cases, patch is so simple, you just submit the patch. Most cases, you're going to first ask, is this something we want, right? And then once you decide something we want, you have to decide, okay, how do we want to implement it? What do we want? What do we want the user API to be? And then once we decide on that, we decide on the user API, then we can sort of look at, okay, so how do we want to implement it? So again, do we want it? What is the user API going to be? How's people going to interact? And then how are we going to implement that patch internally? What things are we going to do and change to make that patch like useful, right? And then the person should start working on the patch, right? And because we've already decided what it's gonna, we want it, we like the design of how it's going to interact with the users. We understand how we're going to implement it, and then we basically would write it, and then we test it, and then hopefully commit it. That's usually the most popular way. And if you bypass any of those steps, for example, you do the design yourself, or you even figure out the way you're going to implement it yourself, and then you show up with a patch, odds are it's not going to go, because all of a sudden we need to roll back that whole thing. Hey, hold on, forget the patch. Do we want this thing? Okay, is this the way we want it to interact? And all of a sudden the patch ends up having to be flipped around because the user's like, hey, I already did it X way. And I'm like, that's fine, but this patch is going to live for 20 years or 30 years. And we want it, the community in general has decided that we want it done this way with this API and so forth. And you can't really undo that easily if you bypass these ideas.
Interesting. Yeah. So the Postgres development group, or often known PGDG, seems to be made up of a lot of regional and national organizations. Some appear to be special, like the Canadian organization. How does that work? Walk us a little bit through the structure.
It's kind of like, well, let's suppose you're doing a car wash. You're doing fundraising for a car wash, right? And a bunch of people show up, and you're like, okay, how are we going to do this car wash? Well, we have to figure out where we're going to put the cars while we're washing, right? Then we need some kind of water source, and we need some kind of soap or buckets or whatever. And who's going to do the washing? And who's going to collect the money? And then obviously we need to advertise. So maybe people are going to have to run around with signs, or we need to do social media or whatever, right? So if you're a volunteer organization and you're going to do a car wash, which happens quite a bit in this area, when those people show up, like, who knows who's supposed to do what, right? So usually you kind of stand around and you're like, okay, we need some people to handle the money, and the person's like, oh, I'm good with that. I like doing that. Okay, good. Here's the money, and here's the little box, and we'll put a little sign over there. And then say, oh, I like washing cars. Okay, that's what you're going to do. Okay, I like advertising. I like running around with signs. Okay, good. And then I like, maybe somebody be responsible for the water and refilling all the soap and going to the store. So effectively, what happens in a project that's this old with this much history is that as needs came up over time, we would have people say, oh, I like doing that, or I'd be glad to do that. And effectively, that's where these teams get created, whether it's a regional conference, or it's the group that manages the website, or the group that does security. These are all teams that sort of said, hey, I see a need over here, and I'm good at that, and I'd like to help out in that way. And they form a little committee, and obviously everything they do is open, so anyone can come in or go out from that community as much as they want. People can make suggestions to that community as much as they want. They can criticize as much as they want, effectively. But That's how you get all these different community. They didn't start. We started with a very small group of committees, but as the project continued to grow and the needs continued to grow, then these separate groups just sort of organized themselves like you would at a car wash.
Okay, good. So I mean, I've heard about some of the committees or groups are public, like the list of committers, major contributors, named contributors. How does one become a committer? How does one become a named contributor? How does that work?
So the committers, as I said, originally we just had a fixed group of committers, and then we would, as people became proficient in providing patches, we would start to make them a committer. So it was kind of the case where, oh, this person's really good at this subsection, and we were like, okay, that person's good at that subsection. They're producing a whole bunch of patches that I'm having to apply. And why am I applying them when he seems to know or she seems to know more than I do about that system? So we're going to give them the rights to commit. Michael Meskes is a classic case. He's been maintaining ECPG since 96, 97. And it seemed like that was his thing. He just loves that little tool, embedded C, API. And, it's something he's always maintained. So, he was a committer up until, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. But he had been the guy who always fixes that part of the system. So anybody who really shows that they can produce consistently good patches is a candidate for becoming a committer. As the years went on, we created an official committer committee, and you can see the list of committers on the website. And new committers are actually added by the existing committers. So every year around this time, around May or June, we will have an online discussion about which community members really are applicable to be added as committers in the next month or so.
Good, great. So there seem to be a lot of things happening besides contributing code, such as packaging, releasing, a lot of really good events, trademark, security, code of conduct. How is all of that organized? I mean, what is there, and how does that all come together?
If you look at all the groups that are involved, some of them are very close to the community. For example, the committers are obviously and the security team and the core team are very close to the project in the sense that they're interacting with the infrastructure of the project all the time, right? So the committers are committing to our Git tree. The people who manage the website obviously are managing the official website for the community. So as you go farther out, like something like the Code of Conduct Committee, the funds group, or the trademark group, those are farther away. So they're not as involved really day to day in the project, but they manage sort of resources that we have occasional need for. And surprisingly, they do a really good job. If you start to look and dig into what all these groups do, they take on a huge amount of responsibility, really to the point where an average Postgres person would never have time to sort of dig into trademark enforcement. I don't know much about it. I don't know a whole lot about even some of the technology we use for the website, because some of the pages are dynamic, some of them are static, and sometimes when we're rendering data on the website, we're pulling from the Postgres database, and if I want to make a change in a page like that, I have to change the database to. So again, you have a lot of specialization as you go farther out, and if that community or that group is not doing a satisfactory job, then we hear complaints about it. Or if they're not doing it promptly enough, the community complains about it, and then we start to look. Maybe they're overworked. Maybe they need more people. Maybe we need to move some people out, bring in some new people to take a fresh look at what's going on. But again, they're not really reporting to anybody in the traditional sense.
Interesting. Yeah. So how would you describe the the overarching organization principle? Like, I know that regionally there's voting, right? So I vote as a member of PGUS. I vote for the US board, right? But how does that work? So I understand that a little bit, how that works in the regions, but how does that then roll up, or does it even roll up?
So the reason that you have voting in PGUS, PGU, PG Japan, JPUG, Japan Postgres User Group, is because that those organizations are controlling resources. So for most of these, they're controlling a website, they're controlling events, they're collecting dues, they're using the dues to promote Postgres within those regions. For these other groups that I'm talking about, there really is no resource that they're sort of managing and responsible for. Yes, they have a responsibility to manage the trademark or manage the infrastructure or manage the security, but the voting thing is a little hard because we're not quite sure who votes. How would you do voting, for example, for the committers? Like, how would that work? How would you? And in fact, we had the meeting in Vancouver, and one of the complaints was that we don't have enough groups that are voted in. Like, most of the groups are self-voting, and I didn't realize how many there were, but there's actually a huge number of groups that are basically voted by the existing teams, not just the core team, but in fact, it looks like the majority of teams are self-voting. And as long as those teams manage to produce satisfactory output, nobody cares. Nobody's going to rock the boat. If you want to join the team, you can ask to join, and if the team wants you in, then they'll bring you in. But there isn't, in a traditional organization, you have somebody sort of saying, okay, you go here, you go there. This is your job, 9 to 5. I'm going to evaluate you later. We don't have any of that because we're volunteers. So we can't tell anyone to do anything. We can't really enforce a whole lot. All we can really do is to coax them to do the right thing. And if they don't, then it will, hopefully we'll bring some other people in and hopefully clean up, if there's a dysfunction there. But one thing I think we've seen a lot is that people are very invested in Postgres. They're invested in the community. They're invested in what our project is doing. And they feel like this is a good use of my time, even though it may take a lot of time to do a lot of these tasks that I'm listing here. They're willing to volunteer their time to do that.
But they're not really accountable to anybody except for themselves and their team members, right? So if I look at the Code of Conduct Committee, for example, nobody, as far as I know, votes anybody into the Code of Conduct Committee or takes them out of there. They are there because they're people who care and they're known to do the right thing. Is that the correct description?
Well, there are nominations. So every year, the Code of Conduct Committee will ask for nominations, and people will submit their nominations, and then the Code of Conduct Committee will pick the people that they think would be a good fit. And as I remember, the nominating people have to publicly state what their platform is, sort of like, okay, I would like to focus on this thing or that thing. And then effectively, they'll report to core and they'll say, of the submissions we've received, we would like to accept these 2 or these 3. And a couple people leave the committee, a couple people come. I think the accountability thing, you're right. It looks like it would be completely chaos and nobody's accountable but I think the thing that keeps it going is the criticism issue. So when something is not going right, people complain. For example, there's a committee that handles who gets to be listed as a contributor or a major contributor on the website. So you've seen that. And there's a committee that's responsible for doing that. However, couple of years ago, that committee was not active. They were not regularly updating people. We were getting questions. Hey, I've been around for a long time. Why am I not a major contributor yet? And we would kind of look at them and say, that's a good question. Like, you kind of should be, right? Or we wouldn't necessarily say that. We would say, we would say that's a good point. I don't know what the committee's currently operating on. Let me ask. And we would have to ask. And if enough people ask, what's your committee doing? Either your committee does what you should be doing, or we decide at some level, perhaps at the core team level, perhaps another level, that we need to change the membership of that committee. Maybe there's one or two people that shouldn't be on there. They're not productive, or they're anti-productive. It's possible, right? And we'll say, okay, we're gonna restaff that committee, and hopefully we'll get better results. And then we won't know for maybe a year until to find out whether we're actually approved it or not.
Okay. All right. So do you have any concerns about how the community will deal with the huge success of Postgres and, the potentially competing interests or tensions? I mean, the magic that I'm observing as somebody who's been with Postgres now for 11 years, the magic that I see between, let's say, EDB and Amazon and Azure and NTT and Fujitsu and so on, companies that are competing in the marketplace but collaborating on a piece of software, right? I mean, aren't there tensions? Is there anything that you're concerned about? Like, is the community going to be able to deal with that?
Well, that's actually one of the reasons we don't have voting as much as you would think. So, for example, we could have voting for the core team. We could have voting for the code of conduct. We have voting for the committers, right? But the problem we've understood is if we have such voting, then companies would be incentivized to encourage their employees to vote for fellow employees. And therefore, it would become the committees could become just popularity contests for the companies. And you can imagine that happening for almost any company, including EDB, where they say, "Hey, we'd like to." Right. So the problem is if you give these companies a lever to get a benefit, then they will often press that lever. And that is one of the reasons that we have done more of the committees vote for themselves, so that companies can't unduly influence. When groups are voting for new members by themselves, like, for example, new committers, they're going to use their criteria in private that the companies are never going to be able to see to decide which people should be added. And hopefully they're going to do that in an objective way, because if they bring in somebody that's not up to speed, then they're going to have to clean up that mess. And nobody wants to do that. So in a lot of ways, it's action. It's somebody's actions that dictate what committee they end up on or what committee invites them. Particularly for committers or security, is that person somebody who we would be comfortable and we wouldn't have to clean up a lot about, and they would make our job easier, right? That would be a good criteria.
That makes good sense. So last question. My last question is, who is ultimately in charge?
It sounds really weird, but pretty much everybody's in charge. If you look at the committees, I think this is most of them. I'm not even sure if it's all of them. They're all operating independently. So they are really in charge of the areas that they volunteered to be responsible for. One of the keys to the Postgres approach, and the keys to open source in general, is the concept that anyone can take charge and be responsible for a fix, be responsible for a feature, be responsible for making a conference happen, be responsible for a security fix or a release or a package or moderating a Slack channel. Obviously we are made all volunteers, and having a flat leadership structure that allows all of these groups to operate independently is really the only practical way we can work. We can't work in a hierarchical system. We don't have control over people. We don't have levers. We don't have the ability to sort of make people responsible for things. So in a lot of ways, it's the vision of the community, the vision of the community to provide the best software that we can, and also the vision of the community to enable people to effectively be in charge, of whatever thing that they feel called to do, whatever thing that they feel that they want to bring to the world and bring to the world through Postgres. And if you look at, the number of people involved and the number of countries and the number of continents that we have kind of all working together in this seamless fashion, it obviously works. You don't think it would, because there are very few structures that are set up in such a democratic and distributed responsibility way. But I think the combination of the vision and the excitement that people have for what Postgres is doing, and the ability to communicate efficiently via email, and some of the events that we have, which sort of help to solidify that camaraderie and the sort of ethos of working together, those kind of all mixed together to create a system where hundreds, thousands of people are responsible for all little parts of what's going on, with very little oversight, frankly, except somebody saying, hey, I think you made a mistake there, or hey, I think it could be better if you do this other thing. And if you're willing to live with that environment where people are giving you suggestions, there's really no limit to what you can accomplish here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And I think the tremendous success of Postgres over the last 25 years, this community-driven approach and the fact that it's become the number one database today shows that something that, really shouldn't work, works extremely well. So thank you, Bruce, for this very interesting conversation. I learned a lot.